Good morning and welcome everyone to today's virtual event from Euractiv's office just at the heart of the European Quarter. My name is Anna Gumbau. I am a climate and energy journalist and event moderator here in Brussels. And I'm delighted to be presenting today's event called A Roadmap to EU Forest Resilience, Tackling Climate Change and Forest Disturbances, organized by Euractiv and supported by Life Terra. Forests play a vital role in climate adaptation and mitigation. They're acting as carbon sinks and preserve biodiversity and our ecosystems. However, because of climate change and extreme weather conditions, damages such as wildfires, windstorms, and floods are harming forests all over Europe. To address these challenges, the European Commission has introduced the Forest Monitoring Law back in last November, a regulation that is meant to help monitor the resilience of our European forests. This proposal is part of the EU Forest Strategy for 2030, which seeks to strengthen the protection, restoration, and resilience of forests in the EU. And in this virtual conference with Euractiv, we are going to discuss how to make EU forests more resilient against climate change and disturbances. We're going to be hearing from our panelists very shortly, but first of all, we would also like to hear from you, and you will have the chance to be asking questions to our panelists throughout the event via Slido. We have this QR code appearing on the screen, which you can scan and use it to ask any questions to our panelists, which I'll be introducing very shortly. Or you can also use the hashtag #ForestResilience on slido.com. We're looking forward to getting your questions, and we're going to be trying to ask as many of them as possible in this discussion. So, without further ado, let's get to know our panelists. Let's start. I'm delighted to be welcoming the Head of Unit to Adaptation and Resilience to Climate Change at the European Commission's Directorate General for Climate, Ms. Elena Wiśnar-Malinowska. Welcome. Next up with us, welcome. Next up with us is the member of the Workers' Group at the European Economic and Social Committee, Mr. Florian Marin. Welcome.
Hello.
Next up with us is the European Forest Campaigner at Fern, Sydney Vendin. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And then we also have with us the Principal Natural Scientist at the European Forest Institute, Mr. Markus Lindner. Welcome.
Good morning.
We also have with us the Director of the Department of Evolutionary Biology, Ecology and Environmental Sciences, as well as researcher and professor of the Ecology section at the University of Barcelona, Mr. Santiago Sabaté. Welcome.
Hello, good morning.
And last but not least, we also have with us the Policy Officer at EU Stafford, and from what I understood as well, a rugby player, Mr. Roberto Stelstra. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, sorry for the eye. I draw the short end of the stick in a tackle.
Sure, thanks in any case for joining us, Roberto. Now, let's start with the first question for each one of our panelists. I would like to ask if you could share with us some reflections on the EU Forest Monitoring Law. What is its importance for the planet and its impact, and why is it so much needed? Maybe I would like to start with you, Ms. Wiśnar-Malinowska, to tell us really how relevant has been the presentation of the Forest Monitoring Law for the European Commission's plans. Ms. Wiśnar-Malinowska.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, we are, of course, alarmed by the actual impacts of the past few years and the projected future risks for Europe's forests. And these are risks for forest biodiversity, forest ecosystems, the main vital functions for the society economy, and at an individual level, also risks for forest owners and forest-based companies. Now, what we know is that climate change means forest change, and in large parts of Europe. With few exceptions, we will not see the forests disappear, but they will look very differently from the forests we know today. The change can be gradual, so we can just remove dead trees and replace them, but it can go also in bounds and leaps. And in your opening statement, you were very clear about the droughts, the storms, the pest and disease, and this is the reality today. Now, the adaptation to climate change is a legal requirement for the sectors vulnerable to climate to adapt. And this is where the monitoring, the forest monitoring law comes very much in the context. Because what we see, there is still a lot of uncertainty, there are many data gaps, and this is what the forest monitoring law is ready to address. The resilience has become one of the main rationale to legislate in the field. And of course, the objective of the forest monitoring law will be to provide accurate, better data to help the foresters and also to member states to preserve the forest so that they are and they continue to be the carbon sinks. And there are the three questions that, or three main messages I want to kick for the start is, first of all, this will make the forests more resilient to climate related stressors, because it will require also a readiness to innovate and do business as unusual in many places. And we hope with the data that will be provided, this will be possible. Second, we must improve our preparedness for forest disasters. And there are measures to increase the production and availability of climate tested forest reproductive material and provisions that come also from another piece of legislation. And third, this is what I want to stress most, we need to accept the uncertainty that is there and make risk management as an essential element in forest management. And this is where the forest monitoring law proposal is bringing us.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Ms. Wisner-Malinowska. I take note of this last point, to accept the uncertainty and making risk management a crucial piece of our work. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to hear from Mr. Florian Marin. Why is so important this forest monitoring law? What can you tell us about that?
Thank you so much, Anna, for giving me the floor. I'm honored to participate here with you. Well, it is important because so far we didn't had any harmonized EU forest reporting requirement. So I think it is important from this perspective, and the European Economic and Social Committee is supporting the Commission proposal. We have common definition, we have a better tool for recording forest data, and to measure, of course, the progress towards sustainability of forest. It is important to mention that the existing regulation is building on data infrastructure which are already in place at the member state level, because this has been an issue in our debate. I think that it is important that it is helping us to approach the multilateral values of forest, meaning to provide new opportunity for the new business opportunities for the forest owner, and I'm referring here especially at carbon farming. It is important, of course, for the decision-making process, because with data are critical for having evidence-based policies, and there are things which I think that can be improved. For example, to have the same level of importance of the three pillars of the sustainable development, meaning economic, social, and environmental data should have the same weight. I think it is important to allow civil society to be part of the development, design, implementation, but also control of the monitoring system and the forest plans, because we do have forest plans which are part of this regulation. So I think that adding a partnership principle, it is important. Then the relation with SDGs. We have no perfect match in the regulation with the SDGs. And we have a dedicated SDG linked to forest. So I think that it's important to have a clear match between indicator proposed in the regulation and each SDGs. Of course, respecting the rights and the interest of the forest owners and forest manager, it is important, and the regulation is touching this. Now, when we are discussing about supplementary data, because the regulation is allowing to the member state to have to approach sustainable supplementary data, it is important to have the same level of granularity, technology, but also frequency, in order to have interoperability and to have an efficient usage of those data. We need financial resources in order to implement it, to implement the regulation in an efficient way. We need to invest in the capacity building for collecting, sharing, using, but also managing forest data. CAP can be used in this regard, taking into account the fact that the majority of the member states is using CAP funds in relation with the forest. But I think that it's also important and this regulation is allowing us to a certain point to have a full traceability of the wood-based data, no matter how the wood is being used, in order to protect the forest and in order to assure a clear resilience at the entire supply chain. And again, sharing best practices could be an effect of this regulation. There are a lot of unclear aspects which I think that will be clarified in the future, meaning the ownership of the data. We have to be sure when the data is public and when data is private. For example, if I'm a private forest owner, and I'm sharing my data linked to my business because my business is linked to forest. Well, those data are private or public ones. So I think that there are a lot of things to be improved. Also, from a perspective of having more clarity between what is a national and what is a EU competence, because it is also unclear how we will approach this aspect. Thank you so much, Anna, and I'm here for any other questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marin. I've noted down a few questions that I would like to follow up on in the debate, ranging from the role of civil society to the financial resources needed to the data ownership component. So already many questions to be addressing in this debate. Now I would like to hear from Ms. Sydney Venin. I understand that Fern has been campaigning for the resilience of European forests for a very long time. So what's the significance of this law to you? How did Fern receive this legislation?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, Fern is an NGO specialized in EU forest policy, and we work with civil society, environmental experts, and foresters. We fully support the Commission on the forest monitoring law. We think it's needed in order to meet a large number of goals in the Green Deal. And we think what unites these goals is the need to have a clear way of agreeing baselines and of monitoring progress. And that's the forest monitoring law. We also think, as the Commission was saying, that with climate change, forests are going to be changing very quickly, and we need information on this, and we need harmonized information on this between member states. In terms of the key objectives of the forest monitoring law, we see three of them. The first is, of course, collecting data on a good range of meaningful indicators. We believe the FML is the opportunity to have a one-stop shop to find the information on indicators for different regulations, including the Nature Restoration Law, the Renewable Energy Directive, the climate plans. And then we also think, as Florian Marin was saying, we want these indicators to concern environmental, social, and economic aspects of the forest. All these 3 points are important. Second, we believe the forest monitoring law is an opportunity to allow planning and informed policy on forests. And here we think the long-term integrated plans are an opportunity to address conflicting expectations of forests between biodiversity protection and nature protection on the one hand, and meeting the needs of the bioeconomy and wood on the other. We believe integrated long-term plans are necessary. We do not think they should be obligatory, but we do believe that access to EU funding should be conditional on their development, given their importance in terms of addressing these conflicting expectations of forests. And third, we think the forest monitoring law is an opportunity to have civil society and environmental experts at the center, really at the heart of planning and implementation of EU forest policy. I think in sum, we think the forest monitoring law is really a key pillar in the EU's forest strategy for 2030. And it's very important to have a coherent reporting framework on all of the objectives of the EU. And again, we reiterate support for an ambitious forest monitoring law. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sydney Venin. Now I'd like to move to Mr. Markus Lindner.
Okay. Yes, good morning, everybody, once more. Yeah, indeed, the natural disturbances have been increasing in European forest, and we have recently carried out a study where we collected ground-based observations about disturbance impacts in European forests, and we clearly worked out that every single disturbance factor has increased in the last decade since 1951. So we are really concerned that also with climate change and increased extreme events, we will have to face more of these disturbances in the future. So we clearly need improved monitoring of disturbances using both ground-based and remote sensing-based observations. In our study that was published last year in Global Change Biology under the lead of Marco Patacca, we also stressed that inventory practices and reporting on disturbances are quite variable across countries, so they're not harmonized fully. For example, wind disturbances are in total the most damaging factor, although in recent years bark beetles and wildfires have also increased. But for example, small wind disturbances, which are offering a trigger for later bark beetle outbreaks, they're not always recorded in all the countries. So it is also critical to improve detection of the uprising disturbance agents. For example, biotic threats have been very strongly favored by climate change, and very few countries are currently actually including them in their reporting. So it is very likely that the trend of increasing disturbances will continue, and therefore we need to focus strongly on mitigating disturbances and also on making our forests more resilient, as already previous speakers have alluded to. So a key strategy of enhancing forest resilience is to convert our monocultures that we still have in many forests, to convert them into mixed stands of climate-adapted species. As climate change has already strongly affected site conditions and we can no longer rely exclusively on our existing species portfolio, we have to also include this in our monitoring. Large areas in Central Europe require forest restoration following the dieback of spruce stands that were killed by bark beetles. And here we need to actively regenerate mixed forests consisting of 4 to 5 species to make our future forest stands much more resilient. Once more, the target here should be to develop more resilient forests. Improving the monitoring is therefore also very important here to detect forest decline, new disturbance threats, but moreover also to monitor how our forest conversion and restoration measures, how effective they are. Lastly, I want to maybe also comment that very often we are looking at the forest resilience, but we should also consider that our forest value chains need to be resilient in the future. Many actors are depending on the forest to provide us different services. And also these actors need to understand how they can make their operations and economic income more resilient towards climate change and extreme events. That's, I think, enough for now, but I will be happy to bring some more examples later in the discussion.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we'll have time for more examples. I know that indeed these final questions around resilience and the effectiveness of existing restoration measures. So thank you very much to Mr. Lindner. Now I'd like to bring on our virtual stage Mr. Sabate.
Hello, good morning. Well, most of the things has been said. I agree with all of the comments, but let me just point out some reflections on this new law. First, it's been said that climate change is moving on and fast, and this is clear, and we are experiencing already changes in our landscapes, and this climate change is not stabilized. So all measures that trying to stop or at least to not making worse are very important. One difficulty of this adapting to climate change of forests, and even not only forests in general, all societies too, is that we are transiting through the change. And hopefully we can manage it. Forests are getting out of optimal ecophysiological conditions, and despite we see the legacy from previous conditions, we still see a lot of forests, but tipping points of change are emerging, and this is also something that we have to deal with. New conditions means also, as Marcus said, changes in disturbance regimes in terms of frequency and intensity. Our baseline conditions are warming up, and our rainfall distribution is also happening. But also these extreme events like with droughts, storms, and pest infestations, wildfires. Well, the distribution of risks is not homogeneous, so we have to look at these differences all over Europe. And in this way, there is also a concept of resist, accept, and direct. We have to see where or which areas we can resist the change. Other areas we have to accept it. There's no way to escape it. But also, I think it's important, and this law may help through the monitoring and knowing better what is on the ground, is to direct the change. So get through the change. We need some common agreements on how we implement and share the monitoring system with enough time and space resolution. This is something that we need. It's true that new tools, remote sensing, are evolving fast, but also they need ground data to validate, and in terms of forest structure and functionality, already provided by sensors. But also the effort of integrating both types of data are key, and this monitoring law should help. Structure and function of forest condition data should be connected. For instance, just as an example, solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence tells us the state of the condition of the forest. But also we need to connect this information from fluorescence measurements to evaluate vegetation stress. And for instance, also structural ground measured data such as TVH, height, basal area, etc., measured from forest inventories, they need to be connected with LiDAR, point cloud data for structural estimations. So this is fast growing, as I mentioned, this technology, and it's a lot of room for improvements. And I think this connection with the law that also would help. Conditions in Europe, we have to be aware that are not homogeneous, but there is a continuum of gradients that are not following the state borders. So there is a lot of information that is gathered by sometimes disconnected in many cases. And this law should help to establish these common procedures and reporting ways. And so it's not only because of getting the data, but also important for modeling exercises, modeling and exploring newer scenarios that people, as scientists, we work with models to project the impacts of climate change projection into the future. It's also very important to have this ground and data, and also remote sensing data available.
Thank
you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabat. I think it's also very interesting to understand really what are the technologies available and what do they need in order to gather the necessary and the granularity of the data that we need. And then last but not least, I'd like to introduce Roberto Stelstra from EU Stafor. From the perspective of European forest management organizations, what does the forest monitoring law mean to you?
Yes, thank you, Anna. For Stafor, high quality, precise and up-to-date forest data is very relevant for accurate management of forest, and always has been. This is why the national forest inventories, they have existed for so long, and they're well established. The need for this up-to-date data is even more important in today's conditions. It's already been named a couple of times, but with climate change, the shift in climatic borders, increasing disturbances, it's important to stay up to date with all the trends and be able to react to it. And today's forests, they have more and more demands and pressures from all kinds of sides. there's a societal pressure to utilize the forest for recreation. It has to support bioeconomy, biodiversity, act as a carbon sink, and to effectively manage the forest and balance all these different demands. It is crucial that we use all the techniques available to us, and we very much welcome innovation with remote sensing and collaboration on how to have innovative monitoring. That being said, it's important that of this proposal are very clear. We believe the objective should be to have cost-effective and innovative data collection and reporting for European forest to support fully informed and science-based decision-making, so that you can achieve resilient, sustainably managed multifunctional forests. In doing so, we still have to respect the national competencies in by member states, or shared at least, and it should be analyzed and interpreted by member states, so that it can be utilized on a regional, national, and local level. So that we can interpret it directly to the reality on the ground, and not miss out on all the knowledge that is with the managers and the forest owners. Yeah, and lastly, we have to avoid having overly complex legislation and monitoring and administrative burden. Have a streamlined and coherent legislation that will make it more effective for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Roberto Stelstra. I would like to actually pick up on the last point that you mentioned in terms of member states maintaining their national competence when it comes to forest management, because in that case, to which extent can the EU harmonize forest resilience management across its member states? Maybe Ms. Wishnar-Malinowska would like to respond to that first and then get a round of responses.
Thank you very much. I'm used to the fact that when it comes to prevention, this is always seen as something national. And when it comes to response and recovery, this is always European. We hear it across many files. So let me start with this one. First of all, we know that at least 60% of the EU biomass is under threat. We know from the latest European climate risk assessment that the, let's say, risks to forests and to ecosystems are to become really critical in the future. We know that when there is a fire in the forest, the Union Civil Protection intervenes in different countries, be it in the south or being in the north. So the disturbances also affect the way we can or we may not achieve our climate policies, because as you know, the carbon sink is part of the overall target. For us, the climate risks make it into a sort of joint exercise, exactly because it is overwhelming. We need to act jointly, and it doesn't definitely you know um, remove the subsidiarity principle that is out there. So it's really many of the forest related policies, as I said, are shared between the union and the member states, and these risks are also co-owned. Let me take the example from the monitoring law that can address also the point that was raised about the administrative burden and so on. First of all, there is an area of data that will be collected by remote sensing. This is where member states or forest owners do not have to report on it. So it will monitor, for instance, the state of the forest canopy, the level of disturbances, etc. And it will lead to fully standardized and comparable data. There has never been a case that the union has produced data that would not be put to the service of people as public good. We are not hiding away data. And if you just look through our website, you will see the wealth of data we give to the service of everyone. And here I would like also to thank Mr. Linde, who was very instrumental in enriching our Climate Adapt platform that is managed by the European Environment Agency, by the case studies for forests that really can help the forest owners to spread the knowledge and to look and work with the best practices.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wischner-Malinowska. Maybe because you've just addressed him and mentioned him, maybe Markus Lindner would like to add something into the question of to which extent can we really harmonize a forest monitoring framework at EU level?
Well, I think it's very, very important to understand that disturbance risks are affecting the forest at the local or regional level, and they are very different the way they are affecting different forest types. We have different biodiversity in different parts of Europe. So the decisions that are taken, obviously, by decision makers at the regional to local level, they have to be adapted to the local context. So I think when you ask for harmonizing forest resilience management across the EU, I think it could be misunderstood that you can actually have a one-size-fits-all approach here. And that's clearly not the case. You really have to understand that our conditions are very subject to regional context, and that also the resilience enhancing measures need to be really fit to the local context. However, we are currently carrying out a big European funded project called Resonate on the resilience of forest value chains. And one of our key findings there is that you can indeed come up with standardized ways how to operationalize the concept of resilience and how to assess this also in diverse circumstances. So the same principles can be applied to different local contexts, but in the end, decisions will need to be taken with understanding of the very specific regional context. So you can give harmonized monitoring information, but you have to understand the information from the local perspective to take local decisions later on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindner. Maybe from Feren's perspective, Sydney, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thanks. I think, first of all, it's important to say that the forest monitoring law does not mandate specific management practices. It asks member states to build plans and it collects data. And I completely agree with the points that were made about people being close to their forests, and those are the people who know best what is happening and should have the final say in terms of deciding what happens to them. So decisions adapted to local context are super important in the context of resilience and of climate change. However, I would also say that Europeans are greatly touched by their forests, and the risks the forest space will impact Europeans. And reducing these risks will increase European stability as a whole, and risks and disturbances do not stop at borders. And we think that the EU can give a direction of travel in line with climate and biodiversity objectives that are EU-wide. And it can also guide funding and provide criteria We know there are practices which increase forest resilience. So Marcus Linder mentioned mixed forests in terms of species and of ages. And we know that there are practices which decrease forest resilience. So here the opposite, for example, monospecific plantation. We know that salvage logging as a response to disturbances can actually worsen the impact of disturbances, particularly to soils and soil structure. And we know that even aged forests are less resilient to certain types of forests than uneven aged forests. And lastly, we know that some introduced species can actually worsen climate impacts. And here, I mean, the most telling example is perhaps the eucalyptus plantations in Portugal and in northern Spain. I mean, a fire-prone species that has worsened fire patterns in that region and impact of forests. So we know that some practices should be avoided. And we do believe that the EU can provide guidance to avoid the practices which decrease resilience and incentives to direct management towards practices which increase resilience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Maybe Mr. Sabate, you would like to add something to this question?
Yes. I think there are many ways to see that the differences of what is happening in Europe, and this monitoring is very important to locate where things are happening. Of course, people living in the places that they are experiencing what is happening there, but a lot of things that people was doing in the past maybe is not a good way to continue, because where they need to change the perspectives. And I think this wider view on forest and objectives on in terms of climate change, in terms of mitigation, and also improving biodiversity, ecosystem services, I think this is for many of them is new. So we have to bring from this global perspective into the local perspective. People is not doing things that they don't understand. So it's very important, the communication there. I mean, if you tell someone that the conditions are changing, you have to explain why, how, and what, and give tools for to see how they can proceed in the future. This is important. But at the end, the people is living in certain places, so they have to also to manage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would maybe like to move to another question, which is in terms of the indicators that make part of the forest monitoring law. Which of these indicators should be strengthened and improved? And in terms of gathering data on these indicators, which are going to be perhaps the most difficult to be addressing? Maybe Roberto, you would like to kick us off with this one?
Yes. We believe that the indicators that are being gathered, they should report on trends in the forest, so that we can actually adequately respond to any negative or positive changes that may come up. To have a clear overview of the trend is a necessity for the policymakers. We believe that the criteria, the standards, and definitions that are already being agreed upon from Forest Europe, that they should be the guideline in the legislation, and that we should build on them. What we believe should not be in the legislation is that all the data that was being gathered, that it should be localized, that should be geographically explicit. This is important for direct management, and it's known with the forest managers, but we don't believe that it should be a public good. In many cases, it is of no use for the public, and it can even compromise the consistency of data sets over a long time. If the exact plots where the data is being gathered are public. Some indicators do not line up with the objectives of the proposal. So for each and every one of them, we should very clearly ask, what is the purpose of gathering the data for this one? We shouldn't gather data just for the sake of knowledge. It should always be for a clear management purpose. For example, localization of forest habitats, old growth forest. It can be done. It is being done on a national level in many of our member states. But to map them, it will come with great costs, a great workload. It's even been stated by ENFIN, the European body for national forest inventories, that it is very much possible technically, but that the burden, it will be high. So we have to ask ourselves, is this the most efficient way to spend our resources? The most important thing for us, any which way, is that there's very clear division of tasks, costs and responsibilities with all the data that's being gathered and is being analyzed. What part is for a member state, what is for the European Union, and that it is consistent over time. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto Stelstra. Maybe I'd like to bring back to the discussion Mr. Florian Marin. What do you think in terms of the key indicators? You already hinted some things in your introductory statement, but maybe you'd like to elaborate more on those that you think should be strengthened.
Thank you, Anna, for this question, which I think it's quite relevant. And I will give you a concrete example of some indicators which are partially covered by the regulation. Biodiversity indicators. And I was a little bit struck about the fact that in the regulation we are tackling only, when we are discussing about biodiversity, we are tackling only birds. Well, in forests we have many other species. So in order to increase the forest resilience, I think that we need to approach all the biodiversity indicators. Modeling has been, and model projections have been mentioned. We can use and we have the technical solution in order to have projections concerning the biodiversity indicators. And I'll give you a concrete example. I'm coming from Romania, and in Romania we have a huge problem with the bear population. So in order to have effective policy based on evidence, well, you need to cover also biodiversity indicators in relation with forest. Also, primary forest, I think it's also important to be strengthened, taking into account the importance of this forest. Of course, that we need investment in order to cover all these indicators. We need technical assistance, but we need, besides this, we need also willingness to share their data. Because what I'm seeing is that not all the stakeholders are willing to share their data. We have to take into account that forest is not isolated. We have also to take into account the forest communities when we are discussing about indicators. And I'm seeing that in the regulation, we have no social data concerning forest plans. We need to take into account a landscape approach when we are analyzing forest data. In the regulation is not necessary very clear this approach. Of course, that we need to have interoperability and we need to have a normal a synergy between data covered by other legislation. And I'm referring here to climate, air, biodiversity, but also common agriculture policy. So we have data which are linked to forest, and we are not using, from my perspective, in an efficient way. But for all this, I think that we need more clarity between what is not a EU competence and what is a EU competence. And indicators which are linked to the entire supply chain has been already mentioned. We need to have full traceability of all the woods in the EU, because right now we are not sure about how much wood do we have in the EU. So I think that this system, it's a good starting point, of course, needs improvement and needs support from the member states. But from my perspective, we need more Europe in order to make it more effective. We have, for example, full traceability in a certain for certain species. They are not necessarily related to forest. But I will give you a concrete example, which is linked to bluefin tuna. We have full traceability of that fish. We can't do it in the same way. It is an international convention. We can't do it in the same way using woods. So we have system, we have best practices, we have experience in this. Let's apply also to wood and to our forest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marin. Ms. Venin, would you agree with that?
Completely agree. I think, and also to pick up on Florian Marin's distribution of indicators, economic, social, and environmental, he was just talking about economic indicators. So traceability is indeed very important. It's also going to be a requirement as per the EU deforestation regulation, which also applies to EU forests and to degradation in EU forests, which is a big problem that also impacts resilience. We also think information in terms of economic indicators on management is important. So the ratio between even-aged and uneven-aged forests is important, as is the area of clear-cut forests. In terms of ecologic or environmental indicators, old-growth forests are, of course, absolutely essential. We need to have these mapped. It's very important for the Renewable Energy Directive as well. And it should be relatively straightforward. Forest connectivity is a good indicator, but perhaps it should be replaced with the extent of natural ecosystems so that the quality of forests and not just their connectivity is informed. Soil carbon is essential, and that's the stock of organic carbon is already an indicator proposed by the Nature Restoration Law and by the Soil Monitoring Law. And Habitats Directive forest habitats are also important. And then finally, in terms of social indicators, we believe that the extent to which traditional forests of indigenous and forest-dependent communities are managed with consent is a very important indicator. We believe services provided by ecosystems, not just wood, is an important indicator, and also perhaps access to forests within half an hour for more urban populations. And I think maybe contrary to Eustafor, we do believe that information needs to be geographically explicit. We think it's important for transparency, and we think it's important to inform management. We also see that Europeans see forests as a public good, and that it's important for civil society to have access to information on forests in their area. And I mean, Florian Marin again mentioned forest communities, and this is something that we're completely aligned with.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Lindner had his hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. As a scientist very much concerned about the impacts of climate change, I would like to really also emphasize how important it is that we actually have good coverage of the monitoring regarding the mixed forests. So we need to have good understanding of coverage and vitality of different species. And I want to just stress many things have been said before, which do make sense for many different policy purposes. But we need to understand when climate change is really threatening our forests. And so we are investing a lot of resources now to restore forest, but we have to also ensure that these planted trees will actually be able to survive and develop these resilient forests. So one particularly important aspect, which is difficult to monitor, but I think it's crucial to be mentioned here, is the browsing pressure on the regeneration, because we are really running a risk that all these millions of euros which are invested to restore forests, they could be just eaten up by unsustainable game populations. So I think the vitality and the sustainable development of these mixed forests should be always very important to really ensure that we will have more resilient forests in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindner. Mr. Sabaté, maybe you'd like to add something?
Yeah, well, I think we're learning on the way. Yeah. For instance, I remember some time ago, many years ago, it was done in Catalonia forest inventory. More, we were thinking on ecological needs of knowledge needs, and in this case, for instance, we introduced measurements on canopy structure, leaf area index, and also understory species present in the forest, not only thinking on standing wood. And this type of information, in the end, we see that was very important, and even more now with remote sensing information that this can be linked to. So in this sense, we need to introduce all these indicators, also nutrient content, growth, that we need to relate. And in terms of the geolocation, I think it's important. It's important because there are many details that the responses of forests depends on microclimates, for instance, the orientation of the slopes, where this is facing north, south, etc. So I think this information needs to be really put on the land. Yeah, that's I want to add.
Thank you. And now, I'd like to bring back Ms. Wisna Malinowska.
I would like just to bounce on what was said on the learning. We have seen that 9 of 10 respondents to the open public consultation on the forest strategy actually mentioned, irrespective from which side they came from, and we know that the debate about forest may be quite polarized, they mentioned adaptation as a very important topic. So whatever side of the spectrum you are, the climate change is our common enemy. And here I would really like to emphasize what was said about the need to learn. So we cannot have parts of Europe that hide, how certain practices are actually helping the resilience of the forest, while the others are struggling with very similar problems. So again, to underline the, for the time being, public aspect of the adaptation policy, and if we are to invest also public funds into it, we need to make sure that the progress is being visible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ms. Wisna Malinowska. Now, we already received many questions from our Slido, so I would like to start maybe picking up some of them. Remember that if you would like to ask any questions on Slido, we have the QR code that's going to be coming up shortly on the screen. There it is. So you can scan the QR code or use the forest resilience hashtag on slido.com. We already have a first question from Pia Stoll. She's asking, how will the regulation fit into the EU's commitment to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework goals? Maybe that's something that Ms. Wisna Malinowska could answer as well. And if any other panelists want to add something, you can just raise your physical hand to me. Thank you.
I think it fits perfectly, but the question is a very good one. We have focused so far very much on the forest monitoring law, but there are so many other forest-related policies that are important, like the soil monitoring regulation, like the climate law, like the nature restoration law, the proposal that is now being discussed, like the wildfire action plan, and so on and so forth. And you need to see it as part of the story. The forest monitoring plan is really to make us better at managing and helping to protect biodiversity, because we need to protect biodiversity at the scale, at different scales. And what comes out, for instance, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is that really to protect biodiversity, we need 30 to 50% of land biodiversity forest, protected. I'm not talking now about strict non-intervention protection, but some sort of high protection.
Thank you very much. Maybe since Mr. Martin, you mentioned also the question of SDGs and that the EU legislation should also fit into that. Maybe you would like to add something on how the legislation fits into the global biodiversity goals. What can you tell us about that?
I think that concerning the relation with SDGs, there is no perfect match. And this is leaving enough space for, being subjective when you are using the data. The relation with the Montreal goals, I think that it fits very well, but what I think is relevant to mention is that forests they are not isolated, and we need an integrated approach in order to use effective the data which are being covered. But for this, you need an integrated public administration, which is not the case in many member states, in order to bring enough efficiency to the data collected. So I think that it's a good starting point, the regulation, but needs more adaptation to or it needs to be integrated in the other legislations, which again, climate, air, soil, biodiversity. There are data which are already being collected, and we need to do this in order not to avoid the duplication of the data which are being collected. Again, the relation with SDG, we are guessing the synergy between the indicators proposed in the regulation and the indicators in the SDGs. So I think that if we are monitoring SDGs under European semester, for example, in our coordination with our coordination instruments, well, this legislation or this regulation should clearly contribute in coordinating the forest resilience and the forest sustainability in the future. Again, which is not the case from our perspective in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Does anyone else want to add any final response into it? Otherwise, let's move to the next question. There's a question on the issue of data that has already been raised. Marco Onida wanted to ask to Roberto Stelstra specifically to elaborate and explain on which basis EU Stifler thinks that certain forest data, especially on publicly owned forests, should not be public.
Yes. So for geographically explicit data, we are mainly concerned with the consistency of national forest inventories. They have been done for some over a century. They're very long-term data sets that are consisting of fixed plots that are being visited periodically, and non-fixed plots. With the public knowledge of where these plots are, especially the fixed plots, it is, you can no longer guarantee that they're not being compromised by disturbances, whether it is on purpose or by people that want to duplicate the data that's being gathered at the plots. At the moment that they're known, they can be altered. And thus you cannot guarantee a consistent data set over a long period of time. And then, of course, it's been mentioned before, for forest owners and forest managers, it's also, in some cases, it's also still their business, which asks, should everything be public? And what does it mean for a market? So there we have to be really careful to evaluate what is absolutely needed to be public, what is useful to the public to know, as opposed to the trends or the broader figures that we can of course share. What is the benefit?
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you very much, Roberto Stelstra. Now, we have another question, this one around carbon farming. It's coming from Jeremy Helen. He says, to anyone who would want to respond, how does carbon farming and forestry go together with the assisted transformation of the forest to enhance resilience? Because one seeks to maximize the carbon stock and the other seeks to prepare the forest for future climate. So how does exactly carbon farming and forestry go together with forest resilience? Maybe that's something that Markus Lindner would want to comment on.
Yeah, thank you. it's not exactly carbon farming what I have in mind, but we are facing many areas in Central Europe right now which have been affected by big, large-scale disturbances. So we have had these large bark beetle outbreaks, and for example, here in Germany, where I'm based here in the Bonn region, North Rhine-Westphalia has been losing 145,000 hectares, which were formerly spruce forests, and now they have been killed. And Ms. Wisner-Malinowska referred earlier to our climate adapt case study, and this was actually in this area here where we are demonstrating good practices in restoring such devastated forests. And it's very important that we can actively restore some forests, because if you would leave the area untouched, you would actually risk that there is no economically viable species coming, and also in many places you would actually have a high risk that the natural regeneration is only reproducing spruce forests, which you are wanting to avoid because they will be again subject to future disturbances. So it's not exactly carbon farming, but I would say that in many areas you are risking that the owners, they have lost all their economic value from the forest. In the next 30 years, there's no economic income to be expected from them. And if they don't invest into planting mixed resilient forests for the future, there is a risk that there will be actually very poor and not resilient stands developing. And I think the investment here should be kind of considered, that you can actually support better carbon sequestration through mixed forests, which are contributing to the carbon mitigation effects, even though it will be difficult to sell them as carbon farming credits.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Linda. I have a hand raised from Sydney Venin and then from Florian Marin. So Sydney Venin, please.
Yeah, I think forests are very important carbon sinks, and their role in mitigation is undeniable. However, I'm very worried about the carbon removal certification framework, and more generally about carbon farming. The absolute priority in terms of climate change is to decrease emissions, and the risk with carbon farming and associated offsetting is, of course, mitigation deterrence, that companies and countries that need to reduce emissions use carbon credits as a smokescreen to avoid doing so. We are also very worried about any approach to forests that focuses on only one ecosystem service. And here in this case it would be carbon. We think that often this leads to poor quality forestry projects, so plantations of fast growing species, which are very vulnerable to climate change itself. And we also have seen very worrying examples of destruction of existing forests and carbon sinks in order to plant forests for carbon farming. And here I have the example of the label bas carbone in France, which allows for the destruction of a forest from the moment that 20% of its trees are damaged, meaning the remaining 80% of trees that are not damaged are also destroyed. Now, this is very worrying from a perspective of climate change mitigation. So we really don't think that carbon funding is the main way that the EU should be increasing forest resilience.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Marin.
Thank you so much, Anna. Well, it has been mentioned that the member states are already gathering data concerning forests. And here we are debating about the fact that the quality of the forest and it's poor, and that we are losing forests. So we need to change something. We cannot rely on business as usual, because we will not moving forward in a way in which you are showing respect for the future generation. And for this, I have to mention that the public interest should prevail in our approach, and we need more public goods. I'm not saying that in the EU, I'm not saying that forest should be a public good, but we need more public goods in the EU in order to boost our transition towards sustainability. Now, linked to your question concerning carbon farming, well, we need to see the forest in a dynamic way, meaning that we need to see sustainability as a source of competitivity, as a source of strength. We should not see sustainability as something which is punishing the forest owners, which is not the case. We should see our progress towards sustainability as a way to move towards sustainable competitiveness, and this should be the future approach on how we will deal with the economic viability of the forest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marin. Maybe one question that Mr. Sabate could answer, since you were talking about the different technologies that should be available for forest monitoring. There's a question from Altea Croce in which she says there's a lot of talk around artificial intelligence and its applications in energy and mobility. Is there maybe a role for it on forest and biodiversity? Is there something that's being maybe researched at the moment on the applications of AI? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is also a challenge, how to implement these things. At the moment, this is still in a process of learning. So it's if you use this type of information, is not providing many times good answers, but it's also a way of exploring possibilities. And for instance, it's also related to the previous questions. When we think at landscape level, it's important not only thinking on just looking within the forest. For instance, to face disturbances, we need to see how is forest continuity at the landscape level, and this is also important. And these tools like these artificial intelligence could help to provide options, but I think at the moment it's still too many to be learned from experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Sabate. Now, maybe I would like to bring back Roberto Stelstra to the discussion and ask from the perspective of state forest management organizations, what support mechanisms are at the moment available to assist forest owners and managers to implement such resilience building measures? What can you tell us about that?
Well, when it comes to the resilience measures, the knowledge is often there. We have, quite a good, quite a good idea on how to manage the forest resiliently. We have the data of where it's important. There are funds available from the European Union in many cases for projects. But what for us is most important is that we don't have to hold our hands up and only rely on funds. Mm. It's for us important that we can actively manage our forest, also get income from the forest that we manage, that it's seen as a healthy, sustainable economy. And with the income that it generates, we can then again invest in every measures that are necessary to keep our forest resilience, keep it in good shape for any disturbances or climatic changes that are to come. It is therefore that we do not want major offsets of forests completely, where we cannot get any income from them. We need the income so that we can invest in resilience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And then we only have a few minutes left for our discussion. So I would like to actually start with, we'll have a final round of reactions and reflections. And I would like to, especially to all of you, to reflect on the way forward of the regulation. How do you think that these instruments that we have at our disposal to ensure forest resilience can be maintained and strengthened also in the next EU policy cycles, taking into account the EU elections are just about a month away, really. So let's have this final round of reflections. I would like to start again with Ms. Wischner-Malinowska.
I think it's very good that the forest monitoring proposal is out there and it is being discussed also in the fora like this one. So I hope it will be adopted in the version then the Commission proposed, as it was debated internally in the Commission for quite some years. And as I said before, it is not the only instrument that tries to address the let's say climate related challenges that the forest face today, but it is a critical one to be able to progress in adapting forests. And very much agree with what has been said before. We are a little bit in the uncharted territory, in the sense of we are not adapting to what we know from the past. We are, learning as we go, and more knowledge needs to be spread and used across the union, also by the foresters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marin.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's a good starting point, but from my perspective, it is not enough to assure resilience in our forest. From my perspective, and from the committee's perspective, I think that we need a new regulation for approaching all biodiversity data, not only birds, because it's quite illogical to cover only birds. Then it is not the only instrument, like it has been mentioned already, but it must be very well integrated in what we already have in order to increase the efficiency. I think that we need to have a clear synergy between the indicators which will be provided under this regulation and the deforestation regulation, in order to protect our internal market and to have the same approach with the third countries. I think that we need a clear, and I have been already mentioned, a clear match with the SDGs, and the secondary legislation which is foreseen should take into account the main objectives of the regulation, meaning to protect forest resilience and to have evidence-based and data policies which rely, of course, on credible data. And I think that we need also penalties, sorry to say it, for the member states which are not deliver credible data. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marin. Mr. Lindner.
Yes, we clearly need to gather. I'm not really too sure about the policy cycles here, how they should affect this particular development, because we need clearly more information to take informed decisions under climate change, how to enhance resilience of our forest and better manage the forest. I want to still a little bit also connect with the previous discussion, because I think it's important that we understand so far forests have been mostly managed with a wood production perspective here. And we now have so many more diverse services that the society needs from the forest. So I think this needs to be hand in hand, that we need to have a viable economic basis for forest managers to manage their forest. And they should not only rely on wood marketing as the only sole income. So we need to have better options to also market ecotourism, have carbon offset payments or other payments for external services, for example, to support biodiversity protection. All these instruments need to be made more readily available, and also then supported with proper monitoring, that we can actually also show that what we are paid for is also actually being provided. Not just standard wood production income, but also really targeted services that we can actually also measure then how they are then delivered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindner. Santi Sabaté.
Thank you. I think it's a great opportunity. Of course, we can go further. This is for sure. But we need to know what we have, and this is changing. So monitor how it's changing. So, how are the forests responding? And I think this could be a good step to improve the information available that still is scattered or not completely connected. And also we need this information if we want to explore how to optimize, not only looking, as Marcus said, about wood production, but also other ecosystem services like biodiversity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabate. Roberto Stelstra.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent opportunity to step up our the ways that we do forest monitoring. We have the chance to innovate in new techniques and have a deeper understanding of what we have in our forest and what to do with it. That being said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have very good systems already in place that we should improve and not replace. We have to rely on the knowledge that is available in our member states, union-wide, and by the people on the ground, and use collaboration to get everything set up in the most effective and best improved fashion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Stelstra. And Sydney Vennin, last but not least.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we can the FML is a very, very important piece of the Green Deal, and we need to support it and have an ambitious FML. And then on top of that, for the next EU mandate, we think it's important to have a new forest pact, which supports the development of new regulations, including the nature restoration law. We also think it's important to have subsidies which encourage transition to closer nature forestry, rather than problematic subsidies which encourage, for example, burning wood for energy, the Renewable Energy Directive. And we also think it's really important to have a commitment from the EU to implement existing regulation. And for example, here I mentioned the LULUCF regulation and sanctions for member states if they're not going to respect their obligations. And all of this needs to be collective commitment from civil society, from governments, and from businesses. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I'm afraid that we need to wrap up this discussion. There's so much more that we could have been talking about, but I'm picking a few key messages here. The fact that we need to accept that uncertainty with the effects of climate change and extreme weather conditions in our forests, and this is why there's this strong need of data incorporated into risk management practices for forests. There is no one-size-fits-all. Our forests and our ecosystems are very heterogeneous, but we still need a very robust framework through the forest monitoring law, and also bring indeed the involvement of civil society in the development and the monitoring of its implementation. So thank you very much to our excellent panelists that have joined us today in this discussion. Thank you very much to the very active audience that we've had on Slido. We managed to pick up a few questions, but there's so many more that we could have asked our panelists. And thank you very much also to Live Terra for supporting this event, and to all of you for having joined this discussion on this morning here in Brussels or wherever you are joining us from. Thank you very much, and to the next discussion.